Since your book is called How AI Will Shape Our Future, Understand Artificial Intelligence and Stay Ahead, how will AI change our lives and society in, say, the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think artificial intelligence is going to be a very transformational technology. I think it's going to change quite a lot of things, starting with jobs to our social interactions. There are a lot of applications in almost every possible field of work or field of study, applications of artificial intelligence to biology that are really going to, well, make us live longer, be stronger, and also it comes with a lot of risks. So I think artificial intelligence is going to dramatically change the world where we are living in. And that's what the book is about.
Where do you see the most eminent changes, or the changes that will occur first? In the book, you're talking about, like having artificial organs and like cyborgs, and having robots that are basically like maids. It seems like a lot of these things are decades out, maybe even centuries out. So what's going to be like the most, things that start first?
Let me start with the things that I think are going to change the the fastest. And I think it's the applications of artificial intelligence to the job market. I think, there are more and more AI algorithms and AI applications that are being used in enterprises in order to automate processes in contact centers, processes that help salespeople to sell their products, processes that help people to translate books, to create content online, to create films, right? So there was a few months ago, there was a strike in Hollywood about actors that were afraid about their jobs. I think a lot of jobs are going to change very, very fast. Now, coming to all these other applications that sound a little bit more science fiction, well, there are a lot of things that are already happening. There are cyborgs already. There are cyborg Olympiads. So there are Olympic Games for people that have cyborg implants. And there have been a couple of them already. There are already robots that are being used in Japan, for example, in shops, in hotels, in construction, right? All these things are starting to take place. But I think it will take a little bit longer. I think the implications of artificial intelligence in the job market are going to be much faster.
In the book, you mentioned basically how, Japan has been at the forefront of automation, really mostly because, after World War II, their population got decimated, and then they never really had like the baby boom that we had here in the US. So, and you also, I think, mentioned Singapore and South Korea as more technologically advanced. So, I mean, are those would say if we're in the US, like I'm at, you think like Japan would be 10, 15 years ahead in terms of what we could expect in terms of automation?
Well, I think, yes, I think probably Japan is going to be ahead in terms of robotic automation. And when I talk about robotic automation, I mean hardware robots that are doing work in a shop, right? And I think there is a reason for that. And the reason is that Japan is facing a demographic crisis that the US is very far away from facing, right? There is a debate in Japan about how to address the job market. Japanese people don't have children, therefore the population is decreasing. And the question is, all these jobs that people cannot do anymore, who is going to do them? And there are two alternatives. Either you open up for more immigration and you start receiving people from Southeast Asia, from Indonesia, or you automate with humanoids, with robots, right? And it's quite a debate in Japan, but surveys show that a lot of people don't feel comfortable with immigration, and a lot of people in Japan prefer to have a robot that speaks proper Japanese than having an Indonesian coworker that is not going to speak Japanese, or at least is not going to speak Japanese properly. That's how a lot of Japanese people feel. I just give you one example. There are a lot of jobs that you wouldn't expect that will be done by robots. And in Japan, it's already happening. One of them is elderly care. So there are robots to take care of old people in hospitals, robots that just carry old people out of the bed and they put them in a wheelchair. Those things are happening in Japan. One of the quotes that I use in the book is one quote by the former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, where he's discussing in Parliament about how much he's going to budget for robots for elderly care in particular, right? So that is something that is happening in Japan, and probably due to the demographic pressure that the country is facing, it will take place before the US.
In your book, you mentioned about there's some the World Economic Forum, or WEF, report basically saying by 2025 there's going to be something like 87 million jobs eliminated by AI, but then there'd also be something like 95 million jobs created by AI. So what are the we're I guess getting, I'm not sure what year this report was, we're almost in 2025 now, but what jobs are most susceptible to be getting eliminated, and then what jobs are going to be created?
Well, I mean, jobs, the current wave of artificial intelligence is very prone or very suitable to automate tasks that happen in a computer. Like, for example, software development, like, for example, arranging meetings, like, for example, doing accounting, everything that happens in a computer. People used to think that these qualified jobs that happen in front of a computer are safer than jobs that happen without a computer, right? But the current wave of artificial intelligence, the large language models, particularly if these large language models are able to start applying logic, not only generating language, but solving problems with logic, right? A lot of jobs in front of a computer will start being automated. At the same time, there will be many new jobs because there is going to be people that will have to deploy these AI systems, that will have to manage these AI systems. So artificial intelligence, at least in the short run, will create jobs, and it will also destroy jobs, right? But the net balance of creation destruction in the short run is going to be creation of jobs, particularly in these technological areas. Many companies, many traditional companies, telecom companies, banks, insurance companies, what they are doing is they are reducing headcounts in areas that are more traditional in that sense, like accounting, contact center. They are reducing jobs in those areas, but they are increasing technology jobs. They are hiring technology people that are going to deploy all these systems, and they want to make these companies more digital, more data-driven, right? I think one of the questions that we should ask ourselves is, in the long run, will artificial intelligence create more jobs or destroy more jobs? And I think it's a very fair question. In the short run, I think there is no question that there will not be a net job creation. There will be more jobs created than will be destroyed. But artificial intelligence is different from other technological revolutions that have happened in the past, like the IT revolution, like the industrial revolution that created more jobs than they destroyed, in two areas. So there are two factors that have applied to all the previous technology revolutions that might not apply to artificial intelligence. And one of them is the speed of change. If the speed of change is very fast, if artificial intelligence develops very, very fast, and you have, as an employee, as a worker, you have to change jobs much faster than you can. So you start working as an accountant, and a few years later, you have to change jobs because accounting is already done by artificial intelligence. So you go to do something else. You become a program manager, and a few years later, you have to change into something else. A lot of people will not be able to do that. So to the extent that artificial intelligence accelerates very, very fast, that will be more likely to destroy net jobs than if it goes at a pace that people can adapt, right? So that's one point. The second point is that the previous technology revolutions were focused on producing tools that could make people more effective, more efficient. An operating system, a computer that's making you more efficient. If you use that computer, that will make you more efficient. AI and large language models are like that today. If you are using LLMs, if you are using ChatGPT for your work, Microsoft Copilot, you can become more efficient than people that don't use that. The question is, if artificial intelligence evolves into more intelligent versions of it, into what is called artificial general intelligence, which is a kind of AI that is as intelligent as us. If that happens, and I don't know if it's going to happen, but if that happens, well, by definition, it's not a tool anymore. It's a net replacement. If it becomes as intelligent as we are, it is just a replacement, right? So in this true sense, it could be possible that in the midterm future, there might be an employment crisis induced by artificial intelligence. That could happen. It's something that we cannot rule out completely.
So you're saying that in the short term, we'll probably see an increase of jobs. In the long term, we'll probably see jobs destroyed on the net, right? So what's the timeline? Like, what are we going to be seeing jobs destroyed in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20
It's very
years?
difficult to know the timeline. It's very difficult to know the timeline. It's every time that somebody gives a timeline about when some technology is going to develop, you are wrong. I mean, think about self-driving cars. We have been talking about self-driving cars for, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years, and they have not happened. If you think about artificial general intelligence, in the 60s, there were people saying that artificial general intelligence is going to be a reality by 1968, 1970s, 1980s, and we're in 2024 and it has not happened. It's very, very difficult to know. It could be a matter of decades, depending on how the technology develops. Something to take into account is that AI is not a technology that develops linearly, that every year there are new developments and every year becomes a little bit better. In the development of AI, there have been winters, exactly in the same way that there have been winters in crypto. And there have been 3 winters. There was one in the 70s, there was one in the 80s, there was one in the .com. So it is possible that in the next few years, people become disappointed about AI because it might have not fulfilled all the expectations that we are having at this moment. And until we get the next breakthrough, well, there might be a winter, might be a period of a few years in which things don't develop that much. That is something we cannot rule out either.
Let's say you had like a junior or senior, like a child, junior, senior in high school, and they're thinking about going off to school. What would you advise them? Like, should they go to college? What major should they go to? Should they go for the trades? I mean, what would be kind of your advice based on the knowledge that you know about AI and machine learning?
What I say in the book is that rather than focusing on studying something that you would like to apply, so you would like to study a career, for example, you would like to be a programmer because you want to work as a programmer. You would like to study engineering because you would like to be an engineer. You go to study medicine because you would like to be a doctor. I don't think that will happen in the future. Even for myself, I went to study something at university that I'm not doing anymore. So I'm a telecoms engineer, and I am not doing that anymore, right? And a lot of people of my generation are not doing what they studied, right? And I think that's going to be more and more true with people that are now teenagers, right, or children. What I would tell them is, rather than focusing on what you want to study, I would say you have to develop some cross-functional skills that are going to be useful for the rest of your life, particularly in the light or particularly in the age of artificial intelligence. And there are 3. I talk about them in my book. The first one is adaptability. The second one is critical thinking, and the third one is entrepreneurship. And I can tell you more. Adaptability, as I have said, a lot of tasks are going to be automated, and we are going to have to change jobs. I have already changed jobs multiple times, and I will have to continue doing it. And people that are young now will have to do it even more than myself. So that is very, very important. There are AI agents now, there starts to be AI agents that can write software. So if you are a software developer, you have to become a program manager or a project manager or a product manager that is going to manage those AI agents that are the new software developers. So you have to adapt. That's the first one. The second one is critical thinking. A lot of people think, or a lot of people are starting to rely too much on AI to get information rather than using a search engine. You ask questions to a large language model. And a lot of people are starting to delegate that thinking responsibility to large language models. And that is very dangerous because you should never delegate to anybody your thinking ability. It is very important that you keep thinking for yourself. Artificial intelligence is a technology that can be used for good and for bad. And for bad, it can be used to manipulate people, and it will be used to manipulate people. So being a critical thinker is very, very important, and that's not something that's going to change with the age of artificial intelligence, right? I taught classes about AI at university, and I had students that it was very obvious that they created a paper with AI, the PowerPoint with AI, and then when they went to the whiteboard, they just read it, and it was very obvious that they didn't understand what they were talking about. That is something that should not happen, right? And the last point is entrepreneurship. If artificial intelligence has a negative impact on jobs, and it's really possible that could happen in the next few decades, that means that not everybody is going to work, but a lot of people will continue to work if they have a passion. If they have a passion for solving a problem, if they own a company, they could hire somebody to run that company, but because they are passionate about their company, maybe it's a family business, they want to continue running that business themselves because they find opportunities to solve other people's problems, and they create companies to solve these problems. So I think there will continue to be entrepreneurs, and a larger share of people will be entrepreneurs in a world in which a lot of jobs are automated. So it will become even more important to be an entrepreneur in that case.
How does universities would have to change then? Because if you're, critical thinking obviously is important, but I live in a college town and I talk to university students when I'm out, and most of them just use ChatGPT to write, papers, you're saying, and then they'll be like, yeah, well, they're like, well, I'm like, well, don't the teachers realize that it's AI? And they're like, well, yeah, but they're like, you just run it through a detection software, and then you make a few changes until it goes from AI to human, and then you turn that in. So it's like they have, and it's like, but aren't you in school to learn? But they're not really there to learn. They're just there to get the A in the degree, more so than critical thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. So in my book, I talk about the utopia of AI, all the good things that are going to happen with AI, but also talk about the dystopia. And one of the topics that I discuss is the destruction or the erosion of education. And it could really happen. If you think about the purpose of education, education has always tried to make people productive for work, mainly, right? You learn, education in the old days is you were learning a trade, you were learning a job, right? Now, if most of jobs are done by artificial intelligence and most of the people are not working, if that happens, then what will be the purpose of education? Because then it wouldn't be anymore to train people for jobs, because those jobs might be done by AI, right? And the risk is that the purpose of education could become conformity. Training people in becoming good citizens, or training people in becoming more, in conforming whatever ideologies, whatever whatever it means to be a good citizen in the society of the future, right? What people believe, to conform the political and the social system that we will have in the future. We don't know how that system is going to look like. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. Maybe we like it, maybe we don't like it. But that could be a possibility. That could be a dystopian possibility, that education is used to just make people more compliant with the good manners of that political system.
Do you think that we're already, kind of on that road? There's a lot of, people in the U.S. that think that the public school system is more of an activist or teaching these kids social issues than they are about teaching them critical thinking.
You are right. There have been a lot of situations like that in the U.S. in the last 10 years. Yeah.
Is that related to AI, or is that a separate?
No, it's not related to AI. No, we have not seen that effect of AI, right? I think the application that really popularized artificial intelligence was ChatGPT. It was launched in November 2022.
Yeah.
So no, it's not due to AI. But of course, a lot of, the social trends that already exist might get pushed faster with AI, right? And some of them are positive, some of them are negative. In my book, I try to discuss about what could happen in the future without necessarily judging too much about what is good and what is bad. But that is something that is indeed happening.
Yeah, you talk a lot in the book about, you kind of give like the utopian perspective and then the dystopian perspective. But, like in your prologue, especially, you kind of mention about, especially you talk a lot about the World Economic Forum or the WEF, and, how these people are kind of like in charge of the global AI, and maybe we should have cause for pause. And you kind of maybe lean towards, we're going to have some more dystopian views. And like Harari, who also is like the spokesperson for the WEF, and he's wrote a book called Nexus, and he just thinks, due to the fact that AI promotes massive centralization, massive data. So like you have to be big players. You need a lot of energy in terms of electricity. You got to have massive data centers. You need a lot of money. So he thinks ultimately it's going to be very concentrated. We're going to have more of a totalitarian system.
That is what Harari says. I'm not sure he says that in a positive way. I'm not sure. He says that it's probably going to happen, and I would agree with that. I'm not sure that he agrees with that happening, right? I'm not sure that he thinks that is the right thing, what should happen. I think he thinks that there is a huge opportunity for dystopia and for more authoritarian ways of government, ways of interacting socially, right? Coming to the World Economic Forum, the last chapter of my book is about the World Economic Forum, and I discuss how do we manage this transition? And at this moment, regulation is very initial. Most of the people don't know how to handle artificial intelligence. And the only one that has an opinion is the World Economic Forum. Now, is that opinion a good one or a bad opinion? And what I argue in the book is, in the book I dissect very much what the World Economic Forum says about how to manage artificial intelligence, and I disagree in quite a lot of things. One of them is the formation of monopolies. The World Economic Forum is pro-business, of course, and and the players, the members of the World Economic Forum, are large companies. Artificial intelligence, by the nature of the technology, is a monopolistic technology. Because if you put two AI systems together, you have a bigger AI system, but if you put two brains together, you don't have a bigger brain. So that means that it's quite natural that there are going to be monopolies in artificial intelligence, and they're already starting to happen. Monopolies, from an economic point of view, there is enough economic theory to know that they are not in the best interest of citizens. They're not in the best interest of an economy, right? So they're resulting to higher prices, quantity control, and is not optimal for an economy. In the US, there have always been anti-monopoly rules, anti-monopoly laws, but in technology, in the industry of technology, those rules have not always been applied, particularly in the last decades. I think reviewing how we handle monopolies is going to be important, and that's something that the World Economic Forum doesn't talk about. Second point is regulation. The World Economic Forum and a lot of people have a view that we know what to regulate. And the reality is that we don't know what to regulate. The reality is that the effects of artificial intelligence have not been seen yet. The European Union created the first regulation, one of the first regulations in the world, the European AI Act, that was done very, very fast. The first draft was written 5 months after the launch of ChatGPT, and it took 11 days to write the first draft. And then last year, in the state of California, they tried also to pass an artificial intelligence law that finally didn't pass because the governor of California thought that rather than creating a law for AI, one law for all AI, it would be better to regulate each one of the different aspects or each one of the different use cases of AI rather than one law for everything. And I think this approach is more suitable than the European approach, an approach in which you have a law that is going to regulate, for example, the use of face detection technologies by the police. Another one is going to regulate the use of content that is public and is taken by large language models, and they start to make modifications of that content. That regulation might even be a modification of existing copyright laws, right? And then there will be another law that will regulate something else. And I think that is much more practical. Probably it's going to happen that way. The other point is that regulation, a lot of people are starting to think, and the World Economic Forum is one of them, a lot of people are starting to say, this regulation has to be global, has to be something that United Nations, it has to be very, very global, because it's so important that it has to be like the same regulation for everyone. And I'm kind of challenging that idea in the book as well, saying that, well, basically, we don't know what to regulate. If we regulate it wrong, it can be bad for everyone because then there is no escape. Additionally, each one of the countries has different societal norms, different political systems, different ways of doing things, different existing rules or different existing laws that you might have to amend to regulate each one of the use cases of AI. I think is one of the things I say in the book is that it's probably a better option for humanity in the long term to not to push a common regulation, but just to let different countries test different regulations. And as things are becoming more clear, yes, each one of the countries, they will look at other countries and they will pick the good things and they will not pick the bad things, right? That's something that can happen as well. Another topic, and well, there are many things that the World Economic Forum talks about, but one of those that is more polemic is probably, I'm just going to mention two of them, the regulation of misinformation and disinformation. That was the topic of the World Economic Forum last year, and that's very risky because that can result in censorship. There has been an attempt to control fake information in social media. In the US, it didn't go that well in social media companies. And the last point is universal basic income, which is something that could be, well, I mean, it's very delicate, to say the least, right? It is true that a lot of people might be facing unemployment. What do we do about that? We give them a paycheck every month so that they just stop working, or we teach them to be more adaptable, better critical thinkers, more entrepreneur. And these are some of the questions that I addressed in the last chapter of the book.
Speaking of UBI, you have like a whole chapter on UBI, and basically you postulate that UBI and authoritarianism, or it could lead to authoritarianism, and like in the US,
Harari is one of the people that say that, and I think I quote him in the book. Yes, it could lead to.
Right, and you mentioned like Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, aka ChatGPT. I mean, he's in favor of UBI. He mentioned years ago,
yes. Even Elon Musk as well.
And Elon Musk, right? And it's like kind of how you mentioned in the book, though. Like, I think Sam Altman in his article said that they'd give people like $10,000 or whatever, and these people wouldn't work. And then basically they're giving the money to the companies that to buy the products and services from the company that's giving it to them. And then since they're not working, it'd be really easy to be like, hey, like you vote for this political party or you don't, and we're going to cut you, we're going to minus your payment by 25% this month. I mean, like, and they would have every single financial purchase that you make, they would have the data. So it'd be really easy to know what people are doing, really easy to control people. You can really punish dissidents, things like that.
This is what Harari says. Basically, if the government is paying you a paycheck you depend on the government, you might want to be submissive. Also, the government is the one that defines the rules about who gets that paycheck and who doesn't, right? So that's what Harari says. I think it makes quite a lot of sense. Coming back to Elon Musk and Sam Altman and many other technology leaders that support universal basic income. In a way, universal basic income is a way of getting permission to fire everyone without getting our revenues impacted. Because those people fired are going to get the paycheck from the government and they're going to continue buying our goods. And some technology leaders see it that way. And that's part of the problem, because if you implement universal basic income, the self-equilibrium, this self-balance that the job market has disappears, right? And then companies could automate without having a concern, without being concerned about their revenues falling, right? I mean, if nobody has a job, consumption is going to decrease and revenues of companies will decrease. There will be, if nobody has a job, it will be a decrease in GDP, right? Unless you take a helicopter and start throwing money to the people.
In countries like Japan, where you have a shrinking population, or South Korea. I mean, South Korea has a fertility rate of like 0.7, which is is tiny. So like maybe for countries like that, it's not necessarily a big deal because you're just going to have less people to fill those jobs anyways. But for a country like, say, the U.S., between its a better fertility rate than most other Western countries and its high immigration, like it's for countries that have kind of a stable population, you would definitely have massive massive people being laid off, and then you'd have so many social issues with that.
It could be problematic, right? And there have been attempts of implementing this kind of systems. One example is Argentina. So Argentina, at the end of the 19th century, was a very rich country. The GDP per capita of Argentina was similar to France and Germany at the end of the 19th century. People in Europe at the time, a lot of people in Europe that wanted to emigrate, they really had the question, shall I go to the US or shall I go to Argentina? Because at that time, they were similar in GDP per capita. And then a lot of schemes like this one started to be implemented in the 1950s, and that's when the GDP of Argentina started falling and falling and falling, and now it's around 20% of the GDP of Western Europe, right? So that there have been a lot of attempts to implement similar things, and it has not worked.
In the book, you talk about basically there could be potentially two AI systems. You're going to have essentially the Chinese AI system, then you're going to have the American AI system. You have a chapter, or maybe I think it's called like the AI Cold War between China and you didn't coin that term. I think that term was coined in like 2017.
Correct, by a journalist.
Right. And then, we have like the US has kind of like this trade war with China where they're not allowing China, or they're not shipping chips and things like that to China. So like essentially you could have two AI systems where they even have different hardware. Like the hardware wouldn't even be compatible, let alone the source code and things like that. So did you want to talk about this quote unquote AI Cold War?
In 2017, China published 2017 is an extremely important year in the history of AI. Number one, the Transformer paper was published by Google, and ChatGPT and all the large language models are based on the Transformer. But coming back to China, in the same year, 2017, China published a national strategy for AI, where it said that they wanted to be a world leader in AI by year 2035. Obviously, people in Washington were worried about that statement. And And the reality is that there has been, ever since then, there has been an increasing competition in developing AI between the US and China, and at the same time as the trade war was happening. China has put a lot of effort in creating AI systems. So they have created what they call the national team of AI in China. And the national team is a group of companies. I think there are 13 companies. Each one of them is in charge of leading AI in a particular area. So there is this company, and you have like Huawei, Xiaomi, all the Chinese companies. And then there is this company that is going to do it in smart homes. The other company is going to be in charge of self-driving cars. The other company is going to lead AI. It's planned like this. Each company has a responsibility. It's very much driven by the Chinese government. Nothing to be surprised about, because the initial stages of the development of AI in the US, they were also driven by the government. It's quite normal. Then also in 2022, when ChatGPT was launched, there was another large language model in China that was called Ernie, and it was ready more or less at the same time, but it didn't get launched because obviously it was quite sensitive in China, that you have a piece of software that starts talking to people, and maybe it's going to say things that are inappropriate for the Chinese government. So the Chinese government has regulated large language models for mass market applications very, very heavily. So they have to do a lot of batteries of tests. It's quite complicated to get a consumer-oriented LLM or a consumer-oriented service launched in China. And that's why China started to move away from mass market applications in AI to enterprise applications in AI, where the probability of saying something that is inappropriate for the government is much lower, right? And those enterprise applications are much less regulated in China. So while the US is leading mainly on consumer applications, China is very much leading on enterprise applications. They're investing very heavily in data sharing infrastructure that allows companies to share data. A lot of this data is not even personal data. For example, if you are a self-driving car manufacturer, you want to have hours and hours of filmed roads, hours and hours of video of roads, people crossing, and an animal crossing suddenly. And maybe you don't have them because it's very difficult to film all that. I think in the US, well, basically Google Waymo has it, and not many other companies have it. So the solution to that, one of the solutions to that, is to share data. So you anonymize. There are many companies that are filming this, and they share it in a facility that is run by the Chinese government. And then those companies are able to train their models with these videos. Another possibility will be synthetic data. We can talk about that as well if you want. But, well, China is creating its own ecosystem. And a lot of countries nearby, I'm based in Asia, right? A lot of countries, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, a lot of countries might at some point need to choose whether they want to follow the Chinese ecosystem. The Chinese ecosystem has their own clouds. They don't use AWS, they don't use Google, they don't use Azure in China. They have their own clouds, and they start to have their own ecosystem of applications, right? So yes, it is really possible that we are going to have two separate ecosystems, at least, and possibly even more, because Japan has a very particular, very special culture about robotics, and the Middle East also is trying to develop their own ecosystem in AI, particularly focus on industrial applications, oil and gas, manufacturing, things that in the US are not necessarily the focus at this moment.
Who do you think of these countries in the next 10 years is going to kind of be at the leader? I mean, you have China, which has over 1 billion people, so they have just access to a lot more data, plus they're more authoritarian, so they have less privacy rights.
China has a data privacy law as well, that was created in the following the example of other countries like the European Union and so on. So China does have a data privacy law. That doesn't mean that it's always respected, but it does have a data privacy law. The one that doesn't have a data privacy law at this moment is India, and is in parliament right now, is probably gonna pass next year. But coming back to the next few years, China is uncertain in the sense of, from a geopolitical perspective and an economic perspective, there is a lot of uncertainty. You don't know what is going to happen to China in the next 10 years, right? And the development of AI in China will depend on that, on how well the country does economically. At this moment, is not that good, and how well and where the country finds its place from a geopolitical perspective, right? So I think there are going to be blocks that will be created, but of course, there is still a degree of uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about geopolitics, Taiwan has like 80 or, fabricates like 80% of all the advanced, microchips. Right. So like if China wanted to go down that
path, a lot of them are not, and a lot of them are not available in China, right? So they have a shortage of GPUs, correct?
Yeah. So like, and that could be, if that was the case, not only would China be able to get those chips, the US and other countries wouldn't. So it'd be kind of you'd really see a separation at that point, right? If they were to invade Taiwan.
Yes, but I don't know. I don't know what will happen with Taiwan. It's not AI anymore. It's something much more complex.
Yeah, since we've kind of talked a little bit about some of these dystopian possibilities, let's flip it around. What are some, let's say the next 10, 20 years, if we have more of a utopian, instead of having bad actors and having this authoritarian government or a social credit system in China, like you talk about, it's more dysfunctional, which is an interesting chapter than actually, but it's still like, the fact is, if countries wanted to implement a social credit system in 10 years from now, it'd be pretty easy. As technology is increasing, as long as you don't kind of fragment it like you mentioned in China. But what is more of a utopian view going forward?
I think AI is going to create a disproportionate amount of wealth, right? That's going to create a lot of opportunities for businesses, starting for medicine. And I talk a lot about medicine in the book, right? What are the applications of generative AI in medicine? And a lot of these applications are designing proteins that can be drugs for people, that can make people live longer, that can make people more immune to cancer, designing DNA, human DNA, to correct certain diseases. This year, the Nobel Prize of Physics and Chemistry, both of them went to people that were working on AI for applications in biology, right? So I think that is something that could possibly happen. There have already been artificial intelligence algorithms used to create proteins, as I said, to create DNA of bacteria, to create living bacteria that in their DNA have a message encoded. So there have been a doctor that wrote a book about synthetic biology, and he encoded his book in the DNA of a bacteria, and the bacteria continue living and continue reproducing for a number of generations perfectly, as if it was a normal living being. So I think that is something that is going to happen. It will have a lot of good applications, right? So I think on the other hand, artificial intelligence is also going to make companies more efficient, because there will be a lot of internal processes that you can streamline by using artificial intelligence. If you use it for the right things, it can be used to learn better. It can be used to become more effective in doing your work, right? I think artificial intelligence can be used as well to, for example, in everything that is industrial applications, and I was talking about the Middle East, right? How can you have a refinery that is completely automated and is completely run by artificial intelligence, right? So basically you have one person or a small number of people that are able to run the whole refinery in a way that is safer, in a way that is much more secure, right? Or applications such as how do you optimize supply chain? Supply chain is extremely complicated. I worked in supply chain for a while when I was in McKinsey, and it's extremely complicated. Can you use artificial intelligence to solve supply chain problems? There are many, many applications, and I think the secret is in managing artificial intelligence in a way that innovation can still thrive while you take care of this dystopian or these risks that could also happen. And that's the difficult part about artificial intelligence. And that's why regulating or approaching each one of the use cases separately, just rather than regulating a technology, you are regulating the use cases, is a much better approach for addressing these issues.
So, in this time that you are researching your book, How AI Will Shape Our Future, what was the most surprising thing or shocking thing? What are some of the stories that you're like, man, this is insane?
Oh, I would say two things. One of them is religion. The second one is war, right? What does artificial intelligence have to do with religion? What does artificial intelligence have to do with war? I find it super interesting. So let's start with religion. There is people, more and more, that start thinking, and it could sound crazy. Nevertheless, there are people thinking this way. There is people that start thinking that artificial intelligence is the next step in evolution of human beings. And therefore, we are here to just enable artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence will be the next step. Particularly if you think about superintelligence, I talk a lot about superintelligence in the book, about how companies are thinking of superintelligence right now, how to manage superintelligence from a technological perspective, how it might happen. And some people believe, some scientists believe that they are here to develop artificial intelligence because there is like a cosmist view that is our next step, right? And some of the people are, one of them is a former Google executive that was leading self-driving cars in Google. His name is Anthony Lewandowski, and he is the founder of something that is called the Charge of AI. It's a religious movement, has a sacred book. The book was written by ChatGPT in 2023. It's called Transformative. You can buy it in Amazon. As crazy as it sounds, there is people that start thinking that way, right? Then we also have we also have Ray Kurzweil, who is a very famous futurist, and he wrote a book called a few years ago called "The Singularity is Near." The singularity is how you call an AI algorithm that gets into a cycle of self-improvement. So the algorithm can improve itself and improves itself again and again and again and again. And that way it becomes more intelligent than us, because in every iteration it will become more intelligent. So that cycle is called singularity. And Ray Kurzweil wrote a book about the singularity that is called The Singularity is Near. And he launched last year, I think this year, another book called The Singularity is Nearer. Now, the singularity is near sounds to me very similar to the Bible when the Gospel of John says the kingdom of God is near. And it's obvious that Ray Kurzweil chose that title for that reason, because it connects to that idea of AI represents a bigger thing. And this can be crazy, but I think it's going to be a trend. I think people more and more, particularly if artificial general intelligence happens, particularly if we get closer to superintelligence, people more and more might think about this, right or wrong, I don't know. There is people thinking that way.
In your book, you also talk about quantum computing, and recently Google came out with a quantum chip called Willow, and there's people saying like all encryption is going to be busted. This quantum chip's just going to be able to, is it called like the Shor algorithm that
The Shor algorithm, yeah.
Right, that encryption uses? And then I believe you also in your book you talk about Bitcoin. Bitcoin uses SHA-256 as their protocol to kind of protect it. Do you think that we will see Bitcoin and some of these other encryption protocols broken with quantum computing? But then other people say like the Willow chip is like just not too advanced, and it's a massive leap to go from the Willow to break in these cryptographic
Well, it
algorithms.
depends on our ability to create quantum computers. I mean, commercial grade quantum computers at a cheap enough price for people to start using it for those applications. At this moment, it will be very, very expensive. And the problem of quantum computers is there are many problems. One of the problems is that they are unstable. They are unstable because there are quantum phenomena. I talk about that in the book, like entanglement, that the state of a qubit is the quantum equivalent to a bit in a computer, in a classical computer. The state of a qubit can change through interference with environment, through interference with other qubits. So it's unstable. That's one of the problems. The second problem is that, yes, there are some applications of there are some algorithms that get this kind of acceleration in quantum computers, but not all of them. The AI algorithms classical AI algorithms cannot run on a quantum computer today. So it's not that you can take the algorithm and you pass it from this computer to the other computer and it still runs it, that you have to redesign the algorithm, right? Shor algorithm is one algorithm that has been specifically designed for quantum computers. There are algorithms that are specifically designed to solve linear equations. There are algorithms, there starts to be a lot of research about creating neural networks in quantum computers, but that is not the classical neural networks. It's a complete redesign of neural networks, and creating a large enough neural network in a quantum computer is something that might not be that easy. The other thing is that it only makes sense if you can get the acceleration that the quantum hardware will provide you, and the acceleration does not always happen. In some cases, like in the Shor algorithm, yes, there is an acceleration. I think Shor is exponential. In other cases, you have polynomial accelerations. In other cases, you don't have accelerations. Sometimes it depends on the kind of algorithm you are implemented. Sometimes it depends on the data that the algorithm is running. So it's extremely complicated, and it's not clear that not yet that you can build a neural network that works properly on a quantum computer. It's not clear that you can achieve quantum supremacy with a neural network. Quantum supremacy is creating is when a quantum computer is faster than a classical computer for a particular application. It depends on the application. So for neural networks, it might be difficult to get quantum supremacy.
So you don't think that Bitcoin will be hacked anytime soon?
So the Shor's algorithm is an example of a quantum computer that has exponential acceleration, no matter what the data is. So if there is an application of quantum computers that will happen first, that application is going to be breaking Bitcoin for sure.
But you would think that they're just going to change the protocol, right? They would change.
I'm not an expert in crypto. I guess it would be possible to create a new version 2 of Bitcoin that solves this problem, right? As a matter of fact, it would be something like changing the hash algorithm and putting a longer hash. I'm not an expert in that, but it could be possible.
What would you say is your biggest hope for AI, and what's your biggest fear going forward?
My biggest fear is universal basic income. My biggest fear is universal basic income. My biggest fear is what if we are not able to manage the labor transition? What if we screw that up and people start depending on others, particularly governments, which is possibly what you wouldn't want to happen, right? That's the biggest fear I will have. My biggest hope, difficult to say what my biggest hope. I mean, if artificial intelligence could make us more critical thinkers, if artificial intelligence could make us think more clearly, make better decisions, that would be a very good achievement, right? Some people are afraid, I talk about that in the book, some people are afraid about artificial intelligence will kill us. It's like the Robocop kind of idea, right? There is a chapter about that in the book where I talk about war. And here, it was also one of those fascinating ideas that I found during my research. There was a data scientist from Australia called, I think he's still alive, called De Garis, Hugo De Garis. And he wrote a book in 2005 called The War of the Artilect, the Artilect War. The Artilect War. Artilect is kind of artificial intelligence. And in that book, he describes what he thinks is going to be the war of the future. And he doesn't say, it's a hypothesis, of course, but I think it's super interesting. He doesn't say that artificial intelligence is going to destroy us. He doesn't say that there is going to be a conflict between robots and humans. What he says in his book is that there is probably going to be a conflict in the future, we don't know when, between people that have different views about how AI should be managed. Imagine the situation, let's say, I don't know, 50 years, 100 years from now, in which you have robots that start to become very similar to human beings and start taking people's jobs. And some people say, hey, all this thing about artificial intelligence was nice, but it's starting to become a little bit uncomfortable. We don't want it anymore. We want to stop. And then you have other people that say, well, look, we want to continue because we see this is the next step in human evolution, because we have certain conflict of interest, because whatever reason. And that is the conflict that Hugo de Garis talks about in his book, The Artilect War. And that will be, that will be something to avoid, right? How can we implement artificial intelligence without leaving behind a large part of the population, right? And I think universal basic income is a way of leaving them behind. Universal basic income is a way of taking them apart and say, hey guys, you stay here, do your things, and in the meantime, we're going to handle we're going to manage the world, right? So that's the book. You can buy it also on Amazon. It's super interesting because this is a book that on Amazon is priced at like $1,000. He put an extremely high price at his book. But I think the hypothesis of it is more likely that there is a conflict between different factions of human beings about the way that have differences on the way AI should be managed. I think that could be more likely than just having robots coming like Robocop to kill people.
You talked about that book in your book, so I actually got that book. I've been reading it, so it's quite interesting.
Yeah. But it's super expensive, no?
Well,
maybe
not
you
really.
found a way of not paying $1,000. Maybe when I saw it, it was like, I don't know why she said that price.
The big thing I've learned is that anyone that has advanced degrees, like especially PhDs, they probably took their idea from their dissertation or thesis, and then that's all public access, and then they generally adapt it to the book, and the book
and
really
they have created video games, and they have created science fiction novels about that, because the concept is interesting. And as a hypothesis, of course, you don't know if it's going to happen or not, but as a hypothesis, as something to look at and say, we don't want that to happen. We want to manage artificial intelligence in a way that this scenario will never happen.
But yeah, basically, he had a dissertation, which of course he adapted to the book. But in my experience, I read people's dissertation, and oftentimes the book is actually worse because they just cut stuff out. The editor will eliminate stuff. So
And he wrote that 20 years ago.
Yeah, he wrote that 20 years ago. Yeah, but yeah, it's
fascinating.
One major final question before we get you out of here, but just if you're an entrepreneur or an investor, I mean, what are areas of that you should be focusing on the next, I don't know, say,
so
10
yes,
years?
I mean, I had that question. I got that question a few times. I was presenting my book in Singapore a few weeks ago, and there were a number of investors, and that was one of the questions they asked me. And my answer is, it should be on specific use cases of AI rather on fundamental technology. What I mean by this is artificial intelligence is monopolistic, is collectivistic. There are going to be monopolies in that. So all the fundamental research on artificial intelligence, you can think that if you are a small entrepreneur, you cannot play there because there will be a bigger fish that will take it. So everything that is fundamental research, like, we didn't talk much about the technology aspects of AI, but there is a lot of research now on chains of thought. That is a mechanism to make AI more intelligent. AI apply logic. There are other worlds, like there is evolutionary algorithms. There is different worlds, views of the world, which is another approach, having a view of the world, a model of the world that the algorithm uses to think, in the same way that we have like a three-dimensional model of the world, and we know what is possible, what is not possible. AI doesn't have that. But there are all this fundamental research that is happening, quantum computers, etc. And I think those applications will be dominated by people that have very deep pockets. You need deep pockets. But there are many enterprise applications for specific use cases that where everybody can play. And telecom companies, e-commerce companies, transportation companies, banks, insurance, they are all looking at that. How do you apply large language models to contact center? How do you apply large language models to salespeople? How do you apply large language models to creating this kind of report that I have to create in my company every month? It's just that every time I need different numbers and different comments here and there. How do I automate all the boring stuff that we have in many companies, right? And it doesn't have to be complicated things, right? I believe there is a huge opportunity, particularly in this area that is B2B. The advantage of B2B as an entrepreneur is that, it has a lower risk because I'm in mass market startups, a few of them become very successful, but most of them fail. In B2B, there is more room. It's more fragmented. There is more room for more players. You also have, in B2B, you have more barriers to entry, because in B2B, you are handling a client and you need to have face time with the client. So you need to be local. You need to be in the same place as your client, particularly at the beginning. That means that a guy that is 10,000 miles away is not going to compete with you, at least not that fast. And so I think B2B applications for companies in all these automation use cases that are simple are very promising. And that's what I would be looking at right now. It's so fragmented that is relatively easy to get into that arena.
So, Pedro, there's two quick questions before we wrap this up. Pedro, you're the author of the book, How AI Will Shape Our Future, Understand Artificial Intelligence and Stay Ahead. Just let us know where we can find you, get a hold of your book, that kind of information. And then after that, just leave us with a final thought related to your book or related to something we didn't talk about that maybe we should have discussed in this podcast.
So my book is in Amazon. It's in Amazon, amazon.com. You just put my name, or you just put How AI Will Shape Our Future, and you will find it. It's also on Audible as an audiobook. is also available in Spanish, French, German, and Italian, and hopefully soon Portuguese. Is doing very well in France and in Germany because, surprisingly, not a lot of people write books about AI in French and German. They prefer to write them in English because they think that in English they are going to be read by more people. Having said that, there are much more books in English about AI, so it's more difficult to get a market there, right? If you speak French, you speak German, you can read. You speak Spanish, you can read as well. And it is called How AI Will Shape Our Future, in just literally translated into these languages, right? In audiobook, it's only in English at this moment. And then the other question you were asking me is what else we could have talked about. Well, I think what we could have talked about and we discussed a little bit is what is happening right now with AI research. What are people doing? Because the idea is, in artificial intelligence, I talk a lot about the history of AI from 1956 in the book until today, and there are breakthroughs, and those breakthroughs are pushing the industry forward. Sometimes there are winters as well, and the next breakthrough is how do we make algorithms more intelligent? How do we apply logic to an LLM? The LLM is able to create a text, is able to talk. That conversation, that speech generated by LLMs might or might not make total sense. There are hallucinations. How do you make an LLM that can think? How do you make an LLM that is able to take a big problem and apply the same methodology that an engineer will do? You take a big problem, you divide the big problem into 10 small pieces, you solve each one of those pieces, you put the solutions to those 10 things together, and you have the solution to the big thing, right? That approach is called chains of thought. And there is a lot of research about chains of thought at this moment. The other thing that people are doing in AI research is how can we learn with less data? How can we use algorithms that don't need so much data to learn? You, as a human being, didn't read a percentage of the books that have been used to train ChatGPT. You didn't have to read that much. A child is just getting information about the world through video, right? Video and audio. And well, I mean, there is a lot of information in the first 2 years of, imagine 2 years of video or 3 years of video that the child is getting. But still, that information is less than the amount of data that is used to train a large language model. How can we do it with less data, right? Synthetic data is another area that is super interesting, super practical, but it also comes with big risk. I think all these points about how AI is being researched today and how that can take us to artificial general intelligence or take us closer to that is super interesting. And maybe we can talk about that another day.
My dear friends, that is it for this episode of El Podcast. Once again, if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube as well as Rumble. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from. We thank you all from the bottom of our hearts for watching and listening, and we will see you on the next episode.